Hello, this is SK Williams, and today I would like to talk to you about something that is rather interesting and important to me. In fact, it's the basis of my thesis that I'm writing. And I have to apologize for the sound in the background. That is a fan. It's hot, so I'm running it, and it may be noticeable on the video, or at least in the audio tract. Still, 2019 is pretty well shot for video production anyway. I am making videos, but I intend on uploading the more high quality and scripted ones starting in January. I am currently working on my college series, finally doing a final form of it. I'm not saying it will be a masterpiece or anything. I'm not really that great at animation or making videos, but it will be at least satisfactory for what it is intended to do, and I intend on doing other things next year as well. But like I said in a previous update video, I'm going to do a lot of smaller, simpler videos, many of which will be unscripted, and this happens to be one. Though, to be fair, it's not totally unscripted. I've given this a lot of thought and done a lot of notes, so I am going to be a bit more directional with it. But yeah, this video is going to be a bit rambly as well. So what is it that I want to talk about? Well, I want to talk about mythology. And that may not mean what people think it means. I'm not going to, say, discuss classical Greek myths of Hercules and Zeus. I'm going to discuss mythology in the context of psychology and how people think. But before I do, I'm going to have to define what the word myth means. The word mythology means the study of myth, and it can mean the body of myths that exist in the world, or at least in a given canon. But in popular use, when something is called a myth, what most people generally mean by that is that it is not true. It's a claim that some people believe are true, or at least used to at one time, but that simply isn't true. And that's not really what a myth is academically, or classically. Classically, a myth is a story that transcends the actual setting or historical reality of the story and speaks about a deeper truth. It is the personification or manifestation of some deeper truth that we can connect to and relate to based upon the fact that the story gives it a sense of form. Even if this form is purely imaginatory in our minds, since we can't really touch it, because we're able to imagine the scenarios, we can see the principles being applied. That's not to say that a myth can't be a story that is completely invented. A fiction can most certainly also be a myth. But it is wrong to think of a myth as a story that's not true in any sense, or even a story that may be based on truth but has fictional embellishments. A myth can be 100% true without any embellishments, and still be a myth if it transcends the mere story itself and is now used in such a way as to speak to a deeper truth outside of it. A good example of this would be how militant atheists attack Christianity by calling it Christian mythology. They're doing it to run down Christianity by both placing it in the same category as Greek myth and by saying it's not true, it's just made up stories. But in many ways, Christianity is mythology. In the academic sense, it must be, since the story of Jesus and how his death, burial, and resurrection brings salvation is more to a Christian than just a story of something that happened. It encapsulates the teachings of Jesus and tells us how we should live and tells us about concepts like forgiveness of sin and eternal life. It means more than the actual events. So while I don't like it when militant atheists talk about Christian mythology because I know they have a bad intention and their meaning is derogatory, you can legitimately call a Christian beliefs mythology. But what's more, you can do this with things that go outside of what we in today's culture typically see as religion. For instance, stories of the American Revolution are mythology. And I don't just mean the stories that are not true or that are true but exaggerated. I mean even the stories that are 100% true as far as we can tell and fit all the facts. This is because, to an American, America's founding fathers weren't simply men who lived in the late 18th century who fought a war. They weren't even important historical men because they founded America. They are the living embodiment of what it means to be an American. And that war, the Revolutionary War, defines the principles of what it means to be an American. The courage it took to stand up to a tyrannical king, to say no more to oppression, to rise up and break the chains of bondage and give freedom to all men. The courage and conviction, all in the principle of the idea that we should bow to no kings, that we, the people, should govern ourselves and be the rightful power, and that the government should work for us. The ideas of what it means to be an American are embodied in that story. And while it is certainly true that many elements of the popular imagination of how the American Revolution played out aren't true, either by being pure fabrication or more often being exaggerated and mixed with false claims, but still having a core of truth to them, the reason that the American Revolution is mythology is because of that aspect, the transcendence of the story, the meaning we give it, and how, to us, it embodies a certain philosophical idea more than just a historical event. In many ways, while most people would not describe it this way, and many may even object to describing it this way, especially militant atheists who oppose religion but love America, the American Revolution and the stories of the Founding Fathers are very much a religious narrative. That's because religion is not really officially defined as belief in a god or superhuman controlling agency. A religion is a philosophy one lives by. And the story of the American Revolution is much like the story of Moses confronting Pharaoh and leading his people out of slavery into the Promised Land. It is a national epic that defines who we are as a people if we happen to be American. Of course, if you're not American, it's not as impressive in that way, but the story can still be inspiring to you. The point being made is that had this happened in the ancient world, it very much may have made its way into sacred scripture, and for all practical intents and purposes, it is a sacred narrative to us. It is a religious story, which is sort of the point that I'm making. I often get into trouble saying that everyone is religious, including atheists. And I'm usually told atheism isn't a religion, it's a lack of belief in a god, and usually one of the atheism is a religion like X is a Y statement is given, such as atheism is a religion, like bald is a hair color, or atheism is a religion, like not playing sports is a sport, or atheism is a religion, like not collecting stamps is a hobby. But the thing is, even if I accept the definition of atheism as a lack of belief in a god, and I don't really accept that definition, but that's not really the point of this video, what they're missing is saying everyone is religious, including atheists, is not really the same thing as saying atheism is a religion. But what I am doing is telling them that religion does not require belief in a god. Even though they'll say that the official definition of religion is that, it's really not. They're just pulling one off of Google, and it became a popular argument. We in today's world love to pretend that there are distinct categories of thought. We have science, philosophy, and religion, and these things are three clearly defined separate things, but they're really not. Religion and philosophy are the same thing, and to a good degree so is science. After all, I could just as easily say that evolutionary theory is a creation myth, much like the young earth creationist ideal of Adam and Eve, and it would be in the same vein as talking about the American Revolution. I would of course be interpreted as being a young Earth creationist who is denying evolution is true by calling it a religious belief, but that's not really my intention. My point is that evolution serves to explain where we came from, at least in part, and it does transcend a mere fact to most people who believe in it. In fact, some people revere it to the point where it is basically treated like the Genesis creation account is amongst the certain Christians who take it extremely literally. But that's the point. Religion is one of those terms that is very fluid and hard to pin down. It doesn't have a single definition. But the reason people are religious in the first place is because people need something to believe in. They need a way to navigate the world they live in. They need structure for their thinking so that the world makes sense. One of the problems I have with militant atheism is that they imagine that humanity evolved as a species without a religion and then some guy invented religion at some point. I apologize. The point is that humanity evolved as a species of atheists, and then someone invented religion and people started believing in a god, but the only reason you believe in a god is because other people told you, and that's not really the way history played out. Religion is actually emergent from the human consciousness. It is something everyone has today and always will, because the difference between a religion and a worldview is non-existent. How you understand the world is your religion. And most people form a group identity because humanity is tribal in nature. So you're going to develop a sense of cultural identity that in turn works its way into your religion. That's why most religions that have ever developed have a strong connection to ethnic groups or people groups or nations. It's because the religion is not distinct from their national epics. Their religion is not distinct from their national history or their history as a people. Their religion is not something separate. And even with more universal religions like Christianity or Islam or Buddhism, you can't really divorce it from its history, and that's something a lot of people don't seem to realize. And ultimately, religious thinking is based upon narratives and mythologies and stories. And that is ultimately true because that's how humans in general think. Even the most hardline militant atheist who insists they think with pure logic and reason will inevitably use stories about things to convince you of their point about how evil religion is, such as, look, religion causes wars, look at the Crusades and Inquisition and 9/11. What they're hoping to do is get you to associate religion as a concept to specific historical events like the Crusades to generate an emotional reaction. In this line of approach, the Crusades aren't simply a series of religious wars that happen to have been fought. They are the embodiment of how religion leads to war. They are an illustration of what religion does. Religion causes war. The Crusades. The thinking is very shallow, since it assumes that all religion always acts the same, but that's the point. The Crusaders aren't fighting just the Crusades, they are fighting every religious war that has ever happened, because that is what they represent when people use that argument. While most people realize that you need more than just one example, and they will point to others, the Crusades are still used as an exemplar, an avatar, if you will, of that concept, that religion equals war. Which is also why militant atheists try so hard to convince you that no one has ever killed in the name of atheism, because they wish to contrast peaceful atheism to violent religion. But in the end, it's about crafting a story, not simply giving you facts. And they do this because if you simply give most people facts, they will probably forget the facts, or even if they don't, the facts won't seem real unless they are connected to a tangible reality that they can see and touch and feel and experience. And an interesting thing about humanity is that humanity has an imagination. You can see and touch and feel and hear things that aren't really there. And I don't just mean that in the sense of mental illness, I mean that in the context of your imagination. If, for instance, I were to start reading a story to you, just a fictional story, even though you know it's not real, you will probably start imagining what the characters look like. You will imagine the environment that they are in, and you will imagine them going through the motions as I tell you the story. While the characters aren't really there and are in fact not really anywhere since they are fictional, your mind has created a sort of simulated reality that you can interact with. And that, in turn, makes what I'm telling you seem real, which is why telling you a basic fact is less impactful than telling you a story is. Because humans think ultimately in stories. They think in myths and narratives and associations. And quite frequently those associations are emotional. This is true even of our militant atheist friends who claim to have risen above emotional biases and how they feel to look at facts objectively. They don't. They look at an emotional narrative. But again, this video isn't about militant atheists. I'm simply using them as an example. You see, people tend to think in this specific way for a reason. It's because memory and sensory input will always, ultimately, in your life, be processed in such a way that you learn from experience. And with the human imagination and ability to communicate, my experience can become yours by simply me telling you a story. But because you were ultimately rooted in a real world, it is easier for you to imagine yourself in my position and see yourself going through the same motions I'm telling you I went through than it will be for you to imagine those same ideas and principles as an abstraction. People learn through experiences. People live in a real world. If you put your hand on a certain kind of rock but it was hot and you yanked your hand away, you may then from that point on decide that if a rock looks like that, you don't touch it because it will burn your hand. This may seem like it's just a direct fact point, but it is also a story. You put your hand on the rock and you got hurt. It's a story. It may not even be necessarily true. Maybe the reason that rock you touched was hot was because someone else had built a fire recently and it hadn't cooled down, or perhaps there's a volcanic flow under the rock heating that specific rock, but that doesn't mean every rock that looks like that will necessarily be hot. But many people will now associate that rock with heat. In fact, many people will associate that rock with a painful heat, even if they know better, because of that emotional connection and because of the story in their mind about what happened when they touched it. Stories have that kind of impact, and stories are how we think. And in the end, stories are what identify us as part of a group. Our ancestors live on this plain under this mountain because we drove off the Kator clan, and we slew the great bears that lived here, and we drove the great saber-toothed cats back to the mountains, and after we and our brave warriors fought so hard, we claimed this land as our own. And it doesn't even matter if that happened 1,000 years ago. As long as you tell that story, and as long as you're part of a continuity with that people, we means you. We means the guy sitting next to you. We means the guy across the room. We means everyone in your group. That is what we is. And that's how people are. People tell individual stories and have individual mythologies all the time in their own heads, and people also have group identities based around group mythologies. Even the militant atheists we spoke of earlier have the science versus religion. Religious authorities tried to oppress Darwin and Galileo and Bruno, and science gives us a future while religion gives us the Dark Ages story. They have a story. Americans have the American Revolution, but also the Civil War and World War II. They have the Pilgrims. Christians, of course, have Jesus, but they also have Old Testament figures like Moses and David and Abraham. We all have these. We all have stories that identify our group, our culture, our beliefs, and even ourselves. And we have these because it is the way people think. I'm going to do a longer, more elaborate video on this topic in the future, possibly in the fall when I no longer need a fan to keep myself cool, because then I won't have as much background distortion. Although you may hear a heater, I think it's a little quieter. But for now, I think I am satisfied with this speech. I think you got the gist of what I was talking about. And while the topic is interesting and can be delved in at a deeper level, I can save that for a later time when I have more scripting and more data to give you. Until then, thank you, God bless, and goodbye.